third session webinar that has a guest speaker. So we had Brian Ungard from Decurium, we've had Susan lead a session, and today we've got Doug Kirkpatrick, which we're really excited about. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
And I think everybody has got themselves on mute, but just a reminder for the Zoom etiquette that we keep ourselves on mute unless we're talking. One of the things that might be helpful, I don't know how Doug's going to run the session, but if you've got a burning question, stick it in the chat, and then we'll make sure there's time at some point in the session for those questions to be asked and hopefully answered. So yeah, I think that's probably it all on in terms of Zoom. Doug, what people have found helpful when they've come on these calls is just to have a little bit of context. So this is a program that it's called Rethinking Organizations. All of the people that you see in front of you are working in human services organizations. So we're all in one particular sector. And that, in a nutshell, means that we are working into organisations that are supporting people with a disability, people who experience mental ill health, or people who are old and frail. So we all run various kind of services for that population. I think the people in front of you are people who are particularly interested in self-determination for the people that we support. I think we've probably all been on that journey for a really long time. And I think this is my take on it, that what's attracted people to this program is what could some of that look like for people who work into our organizations. So everybody in the program is at a different point in their organization. Some have different focuses. And one of the thoughts I had was that a really quick check-in we could do for your benefit, really, Doug, is to get to know who's here, but that we would do a check-in that just gives you a headline from each one of our organisations about what the focus is. So hopefully that'll help. Do you want to say something, Susan?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Just before that, Doug, I thought it's probably worth knowing that we've done with this, as I think I briefed you, that this is a hybrid program. So we've done 2 in-person workshops. We had a kickoff session, and then we had a second session with our friends, the Corporate Rebels. So we had a day with Pim and Yost, which was great. We are wrapping up this particular program in September. But the key to this particular program is that everybody is running experiments. So over the course of this 5 months, we're all supporting each other to do an ongoing series of experiments. So as Kate said, it would be great for if it's easy and quick, also maybe just to let Doug quickly know the experiment that you're running. Back to you, Kate. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's cool. So if we could stick with a really quick check-in, so just a bit about who you are, and if you were coming up with a headline for Doug at the front page of a newspaper on what your organisation's focus is or experiment is, can you just give us a snapshot of what that is? So what about our call on people to keep us speedy? So what about the Avivo crew? So you're all sitting together at the minute. Are you happy to give us your headline?
Self-management. Yeah. Hi, I'm Julia. I think our headline is just around self-management and becoming a deliberately developmental organisation. Yeah, anything else?
Working locally. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're in?
Oh, and I work in the comms and engagement team, and we've recently become a self-managing team. So our manager was for the redundancy, and now we're working out what that looks like, which is pretty exciting.
And I'm in finance, and I really have a focus on bringing these concepts and culture into the back office.
I coordinate services, and our team, like Julia's, has recently working towards self-management, so we no longer have a manager. So
okay, cool. Alfred?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Excellent. My name is Alfred. I work for an organization called 121. I work in human resources, and I guess the hope for our organization in this program is to be part of influencing and developing a lot of self-management through all teams, and empowering and supporting all groups to self-manage well. And part of our project is to look at an internal marketplace where we can canvas a lot of the skills that exist in the organization to the benefit of, I guess, the organization as a whole itself. So that's, I guess, the hope for our organization as One-to-One.
Great. Andrea, Prue, I think you can see.
Hi there. We work for Enable WA, and our focus is self-managed teams, or working towards self-managed teams for teams of support workers who work with people who have a disability or long-term mental illness or whatever it is. So yeah, we're very early in the raggedy stages of that development. Yeah. But excited about that movement for all sorts of reasons. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, cool. Rod and Shayla?
So our focus is probably around pushing decision making more towards the front line of our staff base. And I guess to the self-management teams, we're just kind of really wanting to know more about it before we embark upon any kind of change around that space. Yeah.
Okay.
Shayla?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. Very much sort of looking at financial decision making at the moment and pushing that forward to staff. And I feel like we'd taken quite a number of steps before embarking on the program, and now we're sort of exploring options before we take those further steps.
Cool. Michael and Megan? So Megan, we're just doing some headlines from our organisation, so you might want to pass this one to Michael.
Yeah, Michael can do that.
Okay. Megan and I are from Uniting Care West. We're well and truly, I would say, past the experimental stage. We've been working towards the work of Lulu and with the support of the work of Lencioni now for probably about 10 months in the organization, and with varying degrees of success. We've got 400 employees working across about 30 programs in the organization, not just in disability and mental health. So there's varying degrees of understanding and take up across the organization of what self-organizing teams mean, but we're certainly well and truly on the way.
Peter?
Okay. We work for Multicultural Services Center. I got Amy and Rhoda besides me. Our focus as an organization, as I mentioned last month, we were working through our quality evaluation, which has come to an end. And we are lucky, we got the best results. There was no any action required, although there were a couple of improvements to work on. So as an organization, we are also moving into consolidating our programs. So that means we are also reflecting on the ideas of self-management practices, how we have different programs, many programs now, but we want to bring them together and see how the structure will change, how the structure will look like, how will that help us going forward and into sustainable, viable services. That's all.
Thanks, Peter. So Stephen, Shayla and Rod have just given us an update on My Place. So welcome, Stephen. We're just introducing ourselves to Doug. Louise, we can't see you, Louise, but are you able to give us a headline for your organisation, SDS? Are you there, Louise? Okay, we'll move on. Eric, so we can't see you either. Are you able to give us a headline?
Eric indicated that he's having problems with his audio and video, and he's probably just going to be on listening mode today. So. Okay, well, so that's everybody, Doug. I hope it was a very speedy introduction, but we want to maximise all of our time with you. So I hope that helps, and I hope it gives you some context. So over to you, Susan.
Thanks to all. It does help.
Doug, did you have any specific questions before we begin our conversation?
No, let's jump in.
Great, thanks very much. So Doug, thanks again for your generosity. You know what you mean to me and what a mentor you've been to me on this journey, and how much I've learned from you. So I always just really appreciate the opportunity to catch up with you in this way, and like I said, your generosity. We've done this quite a few times now, and I always really enjoy just inviting you to tell your story, where you've come from, what's Doug all about, how you got to this weird and wonderful place in your life, in your, you know, your, I can't remember what you call it, your second season or your second something like that.
Well, this is probably the third season, yeah. So my first season was in the Great American Education System, and literally the first experience I had with the education system was as a 6-year-old. It was my first day of first grade, and our first assignment on that day was to receive an outline of a buffalo and use a crayon, a brown crayon, and color the buffalo brown. And so I didn't want to do that. I knew that buffalo have variegated coats, and you know there are different shades of colors in their coats. So I said I'm not going to color my buffalo brown. I'm going to color it brown and black and gray, and use different colors. And my teacher was very, very upset. So I literally flunked the very first assignment I had on the first day of first grade as a 6-year-old. And I realized that, the world is about, it seems to be about just kind of doing what you're told and suppressing your creativity and, just kind of setting your brain off to the side and being a robot and kind of following instructions. And that was kind of the experience that I felt throughout my kindergarten through 12th grade school experience. And it always kind of bothered me. I always had this nagging sense that, things shouldn't be like that. It wasn't necessarily the best approach. And so I enjoyed college a lot, where there was a lot more discussion and debate and dialogue and dialectical interplay with the real world and questioning authority. So I really appreciated that very much. And that carried through into law school. After law school, I met this remarkable entrepreneur named Chris Rufer, and he was starting a new manufacturing company and invited me to join him as financial controller. And in the food industry, the manufacturing industry, at least at that time, people wore multiple hats. So being a financial controller really was meaningless. It meant that I handled finance, I handled accounting, I handled all legal affairs, IT, HR, risk management, regulatory affairs, the list goes on and on. And everyone associated with the company wore multiple hats as well. It was very interesting. We had a startup company. It was very successful, financially successful. It was also quite frustrating in that we hadn't put any thought whatsoever into our organizational structure. So we simply defaulted to the traditional command and control paradigm of the moment. This was in the 1980s. And it was typical pyramid, and very frustrating because no matter where a conflict, a dispute, a problem, a challenge, whatever it was, wherever that happened, anywhere in the pyramid, it always shot to the top of the pyramid because we had an open door policy. So it was extraordinarily frustrating. So we had our managing partner, founder at the top. I was one of the managers in the second layer. We had production manager, a quality manager, a marketing manager, et cetera, et cetera. Then we had a layer of supervisors who kind of coordinated the production activities. Then we had a layer of coordinators that carried out the wishes of the supervisors. Then we had everybody else that did the actual work. And we started to collect some insights. One insight was that as we watched people drive into the parking lot for a shift change, we realized that every one of those individuals is a manager in his or her own personal life. So every one of those individuals is making life-altering decisions, who to date, who to marry, where to live, what to do for a living, whether to have children, buy a house, buy a car, go to college, whatever it happened to be. They're all managing their own personal lives. So if they know what to do and how to do it at work, why do they need a manager? Another epiphany was that our founder was signing checks one day, and the way we created checks was that the supervisors would issue a purchase order to a vendor, and we'd receive the part, and we'd have a receipt, and then we'd receive an invoice in the mail, and then a clerk would match all those pieces up, print a check, create a stack of checks for our managing partner to sign. And one day he came to a check and he said, "Why am I signing this check?" A purchase order is a legal liability. It is a legally binding contract. I have to sign the check. I'm adding no value to this process. If I don't sign the check, we get sued. So I'm adding zero value. So he brought the stack of checks down to my office and threw them on my desk and said, "You sign the checks from now on. I've got more strategic things to do." I said, "Fine, that makes great, it's fine." So on we rolled, and we just kept collecting these little epiphanies. And another one was we started to gamify work. So we started to print out some two-dimensional line graphs showing trends on different types of metrics and efficiencies and costs and ratios, and just putting them on a bulletin board. And we found that people were actually locking into these and paying attention to these things and acting on them and actually playing the game of work. And there's actually a book called by Charles Coonrad called The Game of Work, and that became one of our Bibles at the time. So all these epiphanies started to interact together. And in 1990, we started this company called Morningstar. And I joined our founder there as a financial controller. And working out of a tiny farmhouse, he came into the farmhouse one day and said, "Let's throw out the rule book on organizations. Let's start with a completely clean sheet of paper. Let's have a meeting." So we met that night in a little trailer, and he passed out this document, which I think I still have somewhere right nearby, called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. And basically it's boiled down to two principles. People should not use force against other human beings, which is the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. And secondly, that people should keep the commitments they make to others, which is also a foundation of law in the world. And, you may think, well, these principles sound nice, great, sounds good, whatever. But we believe these are the most foundational principles of human interaction, because if you imagine a world where no one used force or coercion against another human being, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. Now you can say, well, that's not reality, and it's not. It's not reality. We know that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is, the closer we approach that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings. The more happiness and harmony and teamwork and prosperity and success we tend to realize in the absence of force. And the same thing applies to us as individual human beings. And the second principle is also extremely important. Imagine a world where everyone did what they said they were going to do. My goodness, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? And we know that's not reality, but again, that's not the point. The point is, the closer we get to that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings. If you go to the store and you want to buy a carton of milk and they don't have it because they advertise they had it, but they really don't have it, that's expensive. And the same logic applies to human beings. When you can flat out count on Susan Basterfield being on Zoom at 7 o'clock at night, California time, that's golden. If I have to guess and hope and not be sure if she's going to be there, that's pretty costly. So commitments are extraordinarily important if people keep them. And if they don't, they're extraordinarily destructive. So we adopted these principles. They became the entire governance of the enterprise. Literally, we ran for 6 years with nothing but these two principles as our governance. And we grew from 0 to become the largest tomato processor in the world. Everyone, I believe, in North America has eaten our product. Goes into every product you can think of in the grocery stores. Ketchup to salsa, tomato sauce, barbecue sauce, pizza sauce, spaghetti sauce, taco sauce, and the tomato soup. The list doesn't end. And millions more around the world, including Australia and other countries around the world. So we finally grew because we expanded. We built other factories, and we realized we needed some scaffolding and infrastructure to support coordination between individuals, but we never abandoned the two core principles. So those are still the governance of the enterprise. And at this point in time, we're approaching $1 billion in sales. We have the three largest factories in our industry here in California. We have approximately 4,000 seasonal colleagues. We do not call them employees, they're colleagues, professional colleagues. And about 500 or so year-round salaried colleagues. So everyone subscribes to the principles of self-management by virtue of accepting employment here, and tries to live it as best they can. Do we have conflicts? Yes, we do. Do we have systems to resolve conflicts? Yes, we do. But we found that you can manage enormous complexity with great simplicity, and you can slash the cost of bureaucracy by not paying professional managers to do things that people can do for themselves and to make decisions that people can make for themselves, and where they're probably better positioned to make those decisions than would be a manager. So I'll just stop and just, see what you have to say.
Yeah, every time I hear that story, I pick up something different. I didn't realize that you worked with Chris even before you started Morningstar. What was that organization?
Well, it was in the same industry. It was a tomato processor in the same industry. It's still there today. It's called Ingomar Packing Company. It's literally 2 miles down the road from the first Morningstar factory. We started that in 83.
And the other part of the story that I really always appreciated, that the self-management experience at Morningstar really kicked into like full embodiment when you had the opportunity to very quickly win a contract, which meant that you had to reorient all your work to build another production line. Can you say a little bit about that and how that felt?
Well, right. So, I mean, we obviously we've grown, but we never had a strategy to grow. We always viewed the strategy of growing as potentially challenging to ethics and integrity. When you pursue excellence and deliver excellence for your customers ask you to grow. Society asks you to grow because they appreciate what you're doing. So we never set out to grow, but we just grew because we were doing a good job and the customers liked what we were producing. So they asked us, and some other antiquated companies started to go out of business, and so customers asked us to build another factory. Please increase your production. We really appreciate what you're doing. So we were just responding to the strategic needs of the marketplace. And we actually just went in and built the factory and ran the factory. And it's only after our first year of production and running the factory that we stopped and said, whoa, that was kind of a crazy mad rush. And we had to hire hundreds of new people and a completely different geographic location, and build a $50 million US dollar factory and deal with new suppliers and new customers and stakeholders. And so we just kind of recognized that the complexity had kind of doubled almost overnight. And so we had different teams, different work groups, and they had to share information and best practices and thoughts, and had to have joint contracting activities and negotiating activities. So we just realized we had to coordinate better. So what's the best way to do that? And our construct became the construct, the idea of a contract. Okay, since we don't have managers of others here, we do have management, self-management, but we don't have management of others. So how are we going to coordinate the activities of all these, by now it's almost a couple of hundred independent self-managers. And so we came up with the idea of having a contract. And this was really the insight of the owner. I want to give him full credit. But let's have a contract, and so you can identify your why and your what, and negotiate and agree on those things with the people with whom you work most closely. So that led to the development of what was called a colleague letter of understanding, and it had some contractual elements. And then these colleague letters of understanding. And I actually just happen to have one here, a paper copy, an original paper copy. And these were signed. People signed these as if they were signing real contracts in real life. And that's how seriously they took them as well. So it was all about, what are you going to do, and why are you going to be doing it, and how are you going to measure the results, and who are you connected to?
Yeah. And so that's the part when I'm trying to tell the story, third hand, understand that there's no humans responsible for the experience of other humans, but you're responsible collectively to each other. How does that work in practice? How many people are in your circle, in your colleague circle? You just said people that you're working closely with, but I'm assuming that other people in the organization that you might be interdependent with. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And since there's no force or coercion or Sherpa telling people who to connect to, it's really every person self-manages that process. And it's very much a common sense process. As it turns out, the last time I measured the number of contractual connections for a given individual, it averaged about 6 or 7. So that seems to make sense. I mean, some team theory talks about ideal team sizes being 8. You can hold close connection relationships in your head up to about 25. After that, you get into what we call stigmergy, which is indirect coordination. But we found that people tended to settle in on an average of 6 or 7 or 8 fellow colleagues. And those are the people with whom they have the closest working relationship. And it's usually people with whom they are either delivering process inputs to or receiving process outputs from. So it just works out, and people are free to add more connections if they see fit. I mean, we do have individuals who probably have 25 connections, but that's probably rare. Probably average is much less than that.
Thanks. I want to ask 2 more questions about Morningstar, then I want to move into your more recent work and then leave plenty of time for questions. But one of the things that you've taught me that I always pause and think about is what you shared earlier, that not only are there no employees, there's no such thing as workers with different collars. Everybody is the same. Everybody is a colleague. Even the humans that are seasonal workers that come and do, I guess, the professional work of manual labor, right? It's packing boxes, right? It's all valuable work. It's all work that needs to be done. And it seems to me that there's some level of equivalence or similarity with the human services sector, and the assumptions that culture and society has about workers that maybe don't have higher education or experience working with complexity. So I'd love for you just to spend a little bit of time about what you found, if anything, different, similar, amazing about your seasonal workers and the workers that maybe have less formal education.
Yeah, that's a great point, Susan. I could actually make the argument that self-management in many cases works better with seasonal workers than it does with year-round workers. They're just there to earn some money in the summer and get on with their lives. And you're right. I mean, many of them don't have a lot of education. But the reason self-management works is because it does respect the human spirit of every single individual. It's about the dignity of the individual. And in that sense, everyone has an equal voice, and that's why it works. Seasonal workers, we don't have an HR department at all. So seasonal workers completely self-managed during the summer. We have probably the largest cohort are sorters. They are literally the individuals that stand on the sorting tables and pull off the sticks and rocks and rattlesnakes from the tomatoes and sort the tomatoes. They make $9 an hour, which is minimum wage in the U.S., in California, and they self-manage completely. So if someone can't make it to work, they have a roster of fellow sorters, and they call for their own substitutes. There's no HR department that coordinates that for them and treats them like juveniles. They do it themselves. They're grown-ups. They know how to dial a phone or call somebody to fill in for them if they can't make it. And if someone chooses to miss work and doesn't call for a substitute, then their colleagues will probably ask them to leave the company because they're not living up to the agreement of the team. So it's a completely self-managed process. It's great, works fantastic. If I look even at the year-round cohort, the heart and soul of the company are what I call the technicians, the mechanics, industrial electricians, automation, instrumentation specialists, quality specialists. Many of them have no more than a high school education. Maybe they have a couple of years of community college, maybe. But they are some of the best at what they do in the whole world. The cognitive, intellectual, math content of their roles is sky high. They have to, in many cases, be like computer coders to handle the equipment and the instrumentation. And they are paid like Harvard graduates. So they're some of the best paid people in the Central Valley because they're the best in the world at what they do. The rest of the world would look at them and say, well, they're blue collar, they're industrial, mechanics, blue collar people. They're true professionals and they're paid like it and they're treated like it. And they have a voice in everything that affects them.
Thanks. That's actually quite beautiful. On the other hand, I'd love to hear a few stories about, or maybe one quick story, and then we'll move on, about individual quote unquote white collar professionals that you've seen come into the organization with expectations about what self-management is and isn't, and have struggled, and maybe why.
Yeah, that's I could use several examples, but I'll use a composite. One of the biggest challenges has been when we've hired for subject matter expertise, whether it's supply chain expertise or whatever, accounting or whatever it happens to be. And because we're hiring for subject matter expertise, we find that the person or the qualified candidates are mid-career, They're in their 40s, perhaps. They've grown up in other command and control organizations. So they're used to perks, they're used to salaries, they're used to command authority. And in the hiring process, they often profess to be able to subscribe to the principles of self-management. Maybe they even think it's cool sounding or interesting, and they'd really love to be a part of it. And then when they come on board, you know what? They can't make the adjustment. They just can't make the adjustment, and so they revert to the command and control authority, and the culture just spits them out, because if you try to exercise command authority in this ecosystem, people stop listening to you, essentially. And so you'll have people that call meetings, nobody will show up because they don't respect the individual calling the meeting. So it really doesn't work. And people, I think some people honestly believe they can make the adjustment and then find they can't. I think others may have a little bit of a hidden agenda from time to time, but that seems to be a real challenge. Hiring people that have grown up in traditional organizations, that seems to be a challenge.
Yeah, thanks. So since Morningstar, I think since Reinventing Organizations was published, and you've become sort of the global subject matter expert on making and keeping commitments. Your book Beyond Empowerment, your new book that's coming out, your columns in Forbes and HuffPost and Fast Company, the work that you do all around the world, meeting other organizations that are, I can't even describe the very, in my mind, bizarre agglomeration of organizations that are looking to you to help them, emancipate their old thoughts about what hierarchy and command authority looks like in big companies. I'd love for you to just maybe share a couple of stories about maybe what's happened since the book, since Frederick came and saw you, and sort of what you're doing up until today.
That's great. I just nonstop travel, Susan. As you know, it's been a bit of a blur, a bit of a whirlwind. I love every second of it. So I feel like I'm doing exactly what I was born to do right now. And it's just going everywhere in the world and talking to anybody that wants to buy me a plane ticket and sit down and have some dialogue about this stuff. Lots of keynotes, lots of master classes, and lots of boots on the ground, consulting, helping leader groups understand, the dynamics of self-management. So that's pretty much been nonstop, I'd say, since September of 2012. And that's when the hire group in Qingdao, China asked me to come over and spend a week walking through their approach to self-management. And so since then, that's 5 years plus, 5.5 years, and it's been pretty much nonstop since then. I've even been to Siberia, of all places, where they have some really progressive leaders that are doing some really exciting work. So it's a lot of fun.
I know I've asked you this question before. I'm going to ask you again. What's sort of the biggest change or shift, or have you seen a shift in sort of the 5-6 years since 2012? And what is your hope and expectation for the next couple of years or half a decade?
Well, I see the shift accelerating. So I put together, I just wanted to kind of understand the movement better. So I put together this model called the Interactive Periodic Table of the Future of Work, and just tried to pull together all the visible threads. And I'm realizing I need a couple of more boxes for things like deliberately developmental organizations and things like that. So it's already out of date after a year and a half. But I see the different approaches and theories expanding, and I think they're expanding at an accelerating rate. And so all these different movements are overlapping and flowing into each other and driving each other. And more leaders are becoming aware of possibilities. In some cases, they're being forced to because they need to deal with the generational shifts in the workforces and things like that, retention and technology and super disruptive things like 4D printing and the blockchain, among others. So it's just it's such an exciting time to be alive. It's just so much fun to be a part of this and watch it develop.
Thanks, Doug. I'm just going to put us back into the room together, and I'd love some questions. I know that Allison, you had one that you'd posted into the Slack earlier. Would you like to offer that to Doug?
Yeah, I can see that Kate's also posted something similar. So yeah, thanks, Doug, for sharing and really enjoying hearing your story. But the story that I'm seeing is a lot of the examples of self-managing organizations that we're hearing about are ones that have started from scratch, and that everybody's on board with the culture from the beginning. And like you say, you struggle to bring some people in who come from a different culture into that organization. We're actually an organization which is already established, already got all that command and control culture. And I guess what I'm looking for, what I'm curious about is some ideas or tips about how we can transform the organization when there's just a few of us that are interested and enthusiastic about the new culture, and how do we bring that change about. So yeah, that's what I'd be interested to hear about.
It's a great question, and I would start small. University of Phoenix here in Arizona had a very visionary leader, Stephanie Glodden, and she got a hold of my book, decided she wanted to have a self-managed customer service team and IT team. And so she just started a book club, and she pulled her leaders together. They worked through the book over a few months, and then they decided that this is what they wanted to do. So they figured out an implementation path, and over a 12-month period, they fully implemented self-management in a previously command and control business unit, and they were completely successful. And when I met with her and her leadership team, they uniformly told me that the best thing about self-management and adopting the principles of self-management is that it was very holistically healing, and not only helped their business and their lives at work, but they were able to take the principles into their families and their communities and their civic organizations, and they found it was almost universally beneficial. So their entire lives got better. So she was quite enthusiastic, as were all the leaders. And so she shared her enthusiasm with other business leaders at the University of Phoenix. And so then they started ordering the book in bulk and figuring out how to implement it in other parts of the business. So trying to do a big global implementation may not be the way to go. Starting in a department, a business unit, or a work area, or a team, and experimenting and just letting the successful results speak for themselves and spark interest in other leaders may be a way to go.
Thanks, Doug. Megan, you had a specific question about the colleague letter of understanding.
Okay. Yeah, I did. So you talked about staff being required to backfill for their own positions when, if they called in sick. So, and if they didn't, then, they'd be breaching their sort of commitment or team commitment or commitment on their letter of understanding. So are there some things on the letter of understanding that are required to be there, that are sort of not negotiable? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, there are some basic overarching principles that are incorporated by reference into each individual's colleague letter of understanding. And so the 2 core principles I discussed at the outset, don't use force, keep commitments, those are incorporated into every colleague letter of understanding. I mean, if you agree to work here, then you agree to subscribe to those 2 core principles. We also have a process for resolving differences of opinion, because if no one has power, then you have to have a process for that. And some other bits and pieces like maintaining, protecting proprietary information and some things like that. So yes, there are some pieces that are incorporated in every colleague letter of understanding. They're not negotiable.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Julia?
I have a question. I met with some colleagues yesterday and we were talking about this, what it looks like in terms of career progression for people and salaries attached to that as well. So we have, we have thousands of, over 1,000 employees across the state. And the direction that we're heading, some of the comments we're getting are, well, how do I progress my career? There's lots of opportunities to develop, but not necessarily the opportunity, it's not necessarily recognised. So if they would go to another organisation, they would still be seen as just doing this, attached to their job role. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, career progression, we wrestled with that for a couple of years. Where we came down is that people are responsible for their own careers, for their own progression. Just like they're responsible for their own motivation. Nobody's responsible for motivating other people. No one's responsible for training other people, and no one's responsible for progressing the careers of other people. Everyone's responsible for themselves. And how that works is that if an individual, and by the way, there are no titles at Morningstar. There's no career ladder. There's no career path per se. There's work, and there are human beings that perform work, and that's it. So the way career change works is that if an individual perceives a desired future state for a role, a different role than the one in which they are performing currently, they can identify that, and if they're able to find a willing mentor who is willing to sit down and plot a transition path for the individual and work with that individual to certify their competency to perform the desired future role, and we can cover the work that they're doing currently, then great. Then draft an agreement and make a contract with your mentor and have at it. Good for you. We just experienced this with a young man who was a very junior mechanic, and he decided that he had an aptitude for and an interest in becoming a full charge industrial electrician, which is a completely different level of expertise and risk management and skill. And he was able to find a willing mentor. And the fact is, no one's going to be willing to mentor someone else unless there is what we call reasonable foreseeability of success. So this young man had aptitude, there was reasonable foreseeability of success. The two of them hammered out a mentorship agreement. It took 4 years. There were multiple elements of blended learning, micro-learning, community college classes at night, textbooks, competency certifications, hands-on training, on-the-job training, videos, etc. And over the course of 4 years, he developed the expertise to be a full-charge industrial electrician, and he is now the lead electrician for one entire factory. at a much higher rate of pay. But he had to figure that. He had to figure out that's where he wanted to go, and he had to find a willing mentor. So it works.
We have time for a few more questions. Jason?
Thanks, Jason. Hi, Doug. I was just wondering when you were talking before about that you came across some conflicts and key conflicts through the self-management. I was just wondering what sort of you must have some reoccurring problems, like you used the seasonal workers and someone not showing up and then not calling anyone and basically not being accountable for doing their job. I guess that's the conflict which sort of you think about self-management is someone not taking their responsibilities. What's the process? You said the others end up calling and taking that person off the team, but how does that work, and what are the other conflicts which you come across?
Well, the other conflicts are so myriad that I couldn't possibly describe them in 5 more hours on Zoom. But just to take the example, everything is conflict because there's no command authority. No one can tell anyone else what to do. No one can tell someone to stop doing X and start doing Y. And no one can fire anyone else unilaterally. So everything is accomplished by request and response. And so if I see someone who is not showing up for work as they have agreed to, and not calling for a substitute as they've agreed to, I am fully equipped and able to make a request to that person, and I can request that person to change, or I can request that person to leave the company. I can frame my request in whatever way makes sense for the circumstances, and that's the accountability. So if I ask someone to leave and they agree, great, we're done. End of conversation. If I ask someone to leave and they disagree with my request, then they can invoke a process we call gaining agreement, which is essentially, okay, I've got a request, I still believe in it, you don't agree with it, we'll have a third party, another colleague come in and serve as a mediator, try to resolve it. If that resolves it, great. If not, we'll have a panel of mediators. And if that resolves it, great. If not, then we'll document the request and your response, and we'll submit it for binding arbitration. And we agree in advance that we will adhere to whatever decision the arbitrator makes. So that's the gaining agreement process. I will say that a huge key for effective self-management has to do with colleagues having accountability conversations with their peers, with their fellow colleagues. Is that easy? Do people enjoy that? Not necessarily. But what we try to do is we try to be super clear and really good at making commitments. So if I end a meeting and say, well, looks like the deadline's Friday, guys, and we all go out and then no one lives up to the deadline, it's going to be really hard for me to have an accountability conversation with anyone because no one's made any personal promises to me. But if I have a piece of paper and I say, I want us to commit in writing that we will do our respective pieces of this project and have them ready to submit by Friday morning at 9 o'clock, and you sign your name to that piece of paper, now you put your personal integrity on the line. So when I have an accountability conversation with you, it's not me attacking you or pointing out your shortcomings or making you feel bad. It's me holding up a mirror to you about your own integrity so that you can see how you've let other people down, so that hopefully you'll make the right decision about what to do about it, and also be more cognizant of the need for accountability in the future. So it's really hard to have good accountability conversations, which are the key to effective self-management, unless you're really good at making and keeping commitments.
I love that. And I'm so excited that that's what your next book is going to be about. And it's this, for me, this is the absolute essence of what we talk about when we say adult to adult relationships. We have time for one more question. Michael.
Thanks, Susan. Doug, you spoke earlier about the strength of relationships within the teams, and the ideal number for many people being around 8 people. So I wondered if you could just expand on that a little bit and talk about maybe that in relation to, there'll be a team of 8 perhaps working together, but then there'll be teams of teams, and how those figures sort of interrelate in the greater grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we have, I've got a picture of the Morningstar network. Let me show it to you real quick because it'll illustrate the point.
Isn't he just so cool? Sorry.
This is a copy. This is a copy. This is the org chart for Morningstar. Can you see that? Copy of the org chart. And I actually had a time-lapse video made of how this network came together in our first factory. And this is a static photograph of the digitized connections from the colleague letters of understanding. But if this were represented in real life, it would be a time-lapse movie. So this would be constantly shape-shifting and moving, and people would be exiting and entering the ecosystem and adding and subtracting members and reshaping, reconfiguring. It would be in constant motion. And so we trust people to self-manage. So yeah, I mean, sure, there are teams of teams, there are teams. Some teams are semi-permanent, some change all the time, almost every week or every day. That's totally okay, because we aren't concocting teams. We're letting people self-organize to create their own teams. So you can have teams that you designate, and you concoct them and you create them and form them, or you can let people form their own teams, and that's what we've chosen to do. Now, it so happens that most people form teams around logical sorts of business units in the various factories and the business functions, but they often span different teams. There are often people who we call mavens, who serve as connectors between teams, and those persons may serve for a while in that role, and then they may get tired and somebody else may step up. So it's just a dynamic, self-organizing mechanism that's in constant motion, and we just trust people to do the right thing.
Can I just really check there, Doug? You talked about the connectors. Is that because, so I just want to get this clear in my head because it's so relevant to something I'm doing. Is that because the team have said it makes sense if one of us is the connector to that team? Because when all of us are, it just gets confusing. Is that the team have kind of appointed you to be the connector for now?
They may, but they may also just, someone may also just step into that role right. without even asking permission. They may just right. step into the role and serve. Okay, that person's really good at being a connector. Well, let's let them keep being a connector. It's great.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Great. Amazing, as always, Doug. Just want to be respectful of your time. Any last words of I don't know, wisdom or encouragement for the team here?
Yeah, it is. People, often throw straw man arguments at me, and they can throw straw man arguments all day long about why self-management won't work, why it shouldn't work, why it can't work, et cetera, et cetera. I think in some of the experiences that you've described for your respective companies, it's already working. And it absolutely can work. And it can work in companies that are transitioning from traditional structures to self-management. It can work in startups, it can work in large companies and small. It's really about respecting the voices of individual human beings and liberating them to, do their best and most vibrant work, and to lead and to innovate as they see fit.
Amazing. Thank you, my friend. Have a great rest of your evening.
You're welcome.
See you soon.
I will do my best.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Wowzers.
Yeah. So I'm thinking we've got a half hour left. I'd love for us to do a debrief on that. I'm curious though. Let me try the poll here. I'll do two. I'm going to edit this. How can I edit this? I just want to ask if maybe we'll just raise our hands so I don't have to play with this. Should we break out into 2 or 3 groups to do a debrief, or should we all debrief together? Debrief in small teams. Debrief all together? Okay, that's everybody. I'm just going to open the mic, open the floor. What did you notice? What came up for you? What was most impactful? What thrilled you? What scared you? Michael, go for it.
In almost everything, or probably in everything that Doug said, he was reiterating that people are just allowed to get on with it and organize themselves without, and it gives that impression that there's a complete lack of supervision or direction, or there's probably guidance, but that's quite a scary concept, and quite we're talking about quite a different industry when you're looking at his personal experiences with Morningstar compared to the industries that we're in, and the compliance issues and the risk issues that we've got. In the industrial relations framework that we have in Australia, that means that you can't just necessarily ask someone to leave the team if they're not pulling their weight. So some great concepts and some great ideas and really exciting aspirational goals, but I am a glass half full kind of guy, but I do see a little bit of reason to exercise caution in what we're doing in following his models.
I think that for me, he can be quite I want to say black and white. That's not quite it, but yeah, you know what I mean. But I think that what I take away from Morningstar more than anything else is the concept that you're accountable to each other. You don't have to have a command and control line manager telling you what to do. It's about the concept of making commitments to your teammates and holding each other to account. And yeah, absolutely. You might not be able to say, no, you've not shown up, you've not called or told us 3 times that you're not going to be able to cover your shift and you've let us all down. You might not be able to have that strong of conversation in Australia in the work that you do. However, you can still be accountable to each other and make commitments to each other. That's how I really interpret the Morningstar model. Not so much on the kind of everything he was expressing.
I think it's important. Sorry, I'm interrupting. I think that notion of incorporating some of the overarching principles into that colleague letter of understanding. I guess that sort of provides some kind of contract, for want of a better word, that you could hold people to even within our industrial relations system. And if you looked at the mentoring, or not the mentoring, sorry, what did he talk about? A mediator, and then it going to a panel and then to arbitration, I guess they would be, that you could sort of implement some sort of process around managing or within our industrial relations system I guess the thing that freaks me out a little bit is it just seems so unstructured, and that's only because I work in an organisation, and I've always worked in an organisation where there's been some sort of structure that that was predictable, and you sort of knew where you needed to go and who you needed to talk to find out about stuff. I think if people are kind of self-selecting their teams, then who do I go to if I have a question about something, and how do I know where that person is or what team they're part of?
What are the rest of you thinking? What are the rest of you? Yeah, Alison.
Yeah, just to reply to Megan, I think it's something that you can possibly move towards gradually by increasing, just introducing the areas of commitment. So, you might start with just taking up the responsibility to find your own replacement if you're sick. Start with that little aspect of your job, and then you introduce something else as people get more and more used to it. And I know when you're saying that thing about, well, who would you go to? Different people will still have different responsibilities that they have committed to doing. I'm still going to be there to answer your finance questions. There's still going to be somebody who's agreed to pay the pay or something. It's not going to be, we're not going to pull everything away straight away. There can be a gradual transition into those ideas, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I think what you were describing just then, Alison, is the whole concept of roles, right? It's again, maybe I'm being way too simplistic about this, but I'm Susan. The roles I perform are doing the rostering, doing development work for mental health, and I don't know, making sure that we're up to date with compliance on whatever. This is what I'm accountable for. The way that I'd like to be held to account is through measurement of these KPIs, that we have no non-compliant sites, and that's really, it's the mindset difference. It's rather than me saying, Alison, this is your job, this is what you're going to do. It's you saying, I'm Alison, this is what I do, this is what I'm accountable for, this is my measure of success, and I want you to hold me to account to that. I think that you're complicating it with all this sector legal compliance thing. It's really, for me, about a mindset shift of each individual taking responsibility for what they do and making their own personal commitments about the work that they're doing.
I'm really curious. So my head's going 10 to the dozen now about, I'm just thinking of all the layers. So Megan, you said something right at the beginning of this session, which was you were collecting all the dumb stuff that we do, right? Which I think is a really brilliant challenge for us all, to try and collect that stuff, right? So I went off on a tangent about that. But the thing that I suppose is really just racing around my head is organisations that I've been part of have a whole load of things in place that I think in a belief that are getting a commitment from people. So things like code of conduct. I can even see now in a lot of the teamwork I've done, big team agreements that are really heavy around this is what we're all signing up for. So it's a kind of intention to get a commitment, but it is ascribed by the org, if that makes sense, or it's defined by the org. And I suppose the real exciting bit for me, irrespective of all the other noise, I think, about how do you do that, is what would it look like if people made an individual commitment? And I think if it was an individual written commitment, I can think of support teams that what would go into that will be really different, I think, for some people. Some people know what derails a team, what their behaviour derails a team. Some people don't, but I am really excited about, instead of people signing up to a kind of groupthink charter or an org-think charter, what would it look like if you had an individual commitment? And I think when I think about the kind of real work in people's living rooms, I think for the majority, people are making an individual commitment to individuals every day. They're saying, I'm going to treat you with respect. We're going to try and figure out a way to work together that enhances your life, not diminishes it. So I think the notion of making a commitment is absolutely real and alive. I just don't know if we've ever really, or for me, I can only talk for me, if I've ever really honoured or respected what are you prepared to commit to instead of sign up to this, ascribe to this. So that's where it's taken my thinking.
Who else noticed something, would like to share something? Andrea.
Well, I guess for me, it's a bit of a slow but light bulb moment, really, in a sense where I'm placed in the organisation and the team that I work with. We already are a self-managed team, actually. So although my job is manager of a region, it's a big region, the size of a country, really, and by its very necessity, it has needed people to kind of develop, their own accountability, really, to work because of that geographical distance, and also the way I work. When I started here, 7 years ago, I kind of always see the most interesting part of my job is when other people are doing exactly what they've committed to do, and they've gathered the skills, and some of those might come from me or some of them might come from other people, but we've all got roles. But really, if I think about it over time, we actually already are a self-managed team, and it's now breaking that down into the support workers. Really, it's really extending what we're already doing, which I don't know why that hadn't flashed off before, but it really hadn't. But we're quite autonomous. We are part of the bigger organisation. Totally, we are, and there are rigid practices that we still have to comply with around HR and risk and all those sorts of things. But generally, we're able to find a way around those things. And I really liked what Megha was saying is we probably do need some formal kind of stuff around what that individual accountability is. And I think I'd like to think that those sorts of agreements, which perhaps had different words attached to them in the past, of contracts and, like you said, codes of conduct. I mean, how many times does that get wheeled out, and really it's not all that useful in the end. So I'd like to think those sorts of things, Megan, are the things, like I'm with you, that they are the sorts of things, if we've got something tangible around that would be the thing that will help us with the IR types of constraints and fair work and all of that. And I think they are quite, I think there are just different ways to look at what those IR, those Fair Work Australia things, how do we comply with those? And I think we can be a little bit, perhaps we can be, and perhaps I'm being naive, I'm often told I am, but I think there are ways that we can comply with those things. We don't want to be unfair or unreasonable employers. How do we comply with those, areas, but in a more creative way? Yeah, I guess that's just where I am.
I'd love to hear from Alfred or Rod or Peter or Amy or Shayla or Stephen or Peter.
I just want to share what we found, not really what we found, but the feedback that we got from the quality evaluation we had last month. Really, it was interesting to hear from the quality evaluator officer that we are the organization and the team of our support workers, that according to her observation, there was a gap, there was a disconnect. And it came to me in a sense that I was not surprised, because we've been a program in a way we really strengthen and and create relationships between the support workers and the people they're working with, to the point that they have a lot of their autonomies. So say that, for example, if the support worker is unwell, they want to call in sick, they first contact the family and then inform us later. Or sometimes they contact their colleague that they're working with to cover their shift and then let us know later on. And then a lot of things happen between the support worker and the family. They really forge a very fantastic relationship that was noticed by the quality evaluation team. So when we had our exit meeting and we were reflecting on what does that mean to us as an organization, because yes, from the structural hierarchy, there was a concern. How can we, have that connection between the organizations and the support workers? And that means having organizations of culture, what is happening, all the events, and how that is translated into the team of support workers. So coming to what we just talked today, really on the point of what the last speaker was just saying, that really there's already some elements of self-management that's already happening. The challenge here is how we can really connect the dots and really tease it out in a way, there's a lot of clarity. There's, put a bit of quality into it so that it becomes consistent. So we are, and also so that as a program manager, so that I have confidence in it. This is something that is working. This is a model. This is something, if I go back to the organization, executive management, I can really tell them this is working well. So that's where the difficulties come in. And there's a lot of things that we're doing that the quality evaluation mentioned to her that are really outside the traditional ways of working, outside the box thinking. There was some element of that, how we gave some autonomy even to the families to really manage their own rosters and their own times with their support workers. So I'm just wondering how can we tie into a big picture of self-managing as an organization or even as a program. There's already a planning now in the organization. We are moving from a program to other programs coming in. So how do we maintain the practices that we were doing as we emerge with other programs? So it becomes very interesting a little bit down the track. But there's a lot of elements already in what we are doing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing, Peter. Rod, Stephen, Alfred?
I'll jump in. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I guess one of the things I'm wondering about is obviously what we're trying to do is have people with disabilities in charge of their own affairs. So have them as the decision maker, them as the manager of their own supports in their lives and things like that. So I suppose one of the things I'm just wondering is, with self-managing teams of direct care staff, how does that intersect with the person with a disability being in charge of their own affairs? I guess you've already got that issue with organisational, hierarchies, having control over people. So you need to be mindful of how do you prevent the staff taking control over the person with a disability's life, and how does that intersect? I guess that's the question I'm asking myself.
Interesting. Julia?
I think that's a cool question.
I might be able to talk a little bit to that with some of the things that we're doing here. We have some teams who are working in a more self-managing way and creating teams with the customer, and as simple as setting up a team email. So that includes the customer. So every single decision, any single change in shift or something that the customer might want, they're all in it together. And there's an understanding with the customer that some things that might be requested because of funding constraints or whatever can't be done, but there's no conversations that don't happen without the customer's involvement, because it's all on this team email, which helps the team to stay connected because they're scattered around the metro area, let's say, but also the customer as well. I don't know if that's a helpful example of some of the ways we're doing that.
Thanks, Julia. I think it's a really good question, Rod. I think there's loads that we could, that we could all contribute around that or think together about it, I think. I've got the job of wrapping up because there's a few more minutes left. So I suppose my plea is in 2 weeks' time, we have an open session before obviously the next speaker 2 weeks after that. And the open sessions, I think, have been really helpful to come together and chew the fat about some of this stuff. You know, I know we've been talking about some of our experiments, but I think the harder this is getting or the trickier it becomes, I think this is exactly what we hoped the open sessions would give us some chance to think about. So I think that question, Rod, would be a brilliant one for one of those sessions. I think the other one that's come up is around the advice process. So what are these processes that seem to be in place in different organisations that are helping people either hold each other to account or to make decisions? So that was the other one that I'd got down mentally, got down for the next session. So over the next couple of weeks in the Slack channel, if you can post any topics that you think would be really helpful for the open reflection sessions, because I think we want to get them, we want the program to support you the best way that we can to get the most out of it. So have a think about that. Any big topics that we could chew the fat over, please post them in there. So I'm going to wrap up because I want to stick to time. So if it's okay with you, shall we just do a checkout in terms of where your head's at? And if we could stick to no more than 3 words. And yes, Susan, 3 words. So I'm just going to call on people. Stephen.
Wow, I got to think of 3 words. My head is in the clouds.
Okay, cool. Megan.
Contemplative. I've only got 1.
Okay, that's fine. Michael?
I think he's gone.
No, he's there. I can see him.
The way forward.
Rod?
Busy.
Peter and Nadia, is it? And Amy?
Yes. Our mindset. Rhoda said mindsets.
Okay.
Changing mindset.
Okay, cool.
Culture as well for me.
Culture for you, Peter. Okay, great. Shayla?
Ponderous and intrigued.
Cool. Andrea?
It's sunny behind the clouds.
Julia?
Adult relationships.
Alison?
Struggling with
Thinking about commitments.
I'm feeling inspired.
Okay, cool. Susan?
Holistically healing.
Alfred?
Struggling with the shift.
Lots to think about. That's mine. Eric, can you contribute or not? Inquisitive, intrigued, Eric's put into the... Thank you, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks. Remember to go to Slack and see you soon. Cheers, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.